Good evening, everybody. Glad you're here. And this is our sixth this is a pilot project of emotional healing lecture series. And thanks to everyone showing up and from all different parts of our community. It's been a great success. We've had grief and loss, spirituality, true identity, codependency, trauma, of course, different levels of emotional sobriety and recovery. And I want to thank Lawrence, if he disappeared. There he is. Lawrence for helping me in a drive deciding to do this. And thanks to Rio Grande treatment as well as Golden Willow counseling, we said, well, let's go for it and see what happens. And it's been an awesome series. Our hope is that it will continue. We'll probably change the day, but it's just been a piece I've been so passionate about of how do we get information out to our entire community. And I'm a big believer in emotional healing starts with a certain intellectual finger hold that can turn into a hand hold that can then turn into a foothold. So I appreciate each one of you being here because then you go out as one of those finger holds that helps our community. So thank you. I want to thank Kit Carson Electric for donating this room once a month for us to do this. It's a special place. It's kind of emotional. Last time I was in here was very early one morning a couple weeks ago after one of their people had died on the line. And so I want to honor that and honor their organization who's really having to work through that right now. So really that piece is out there and how we come together as a community is big. Just some logistics. The bathrooms are down this door and then it says bathrooms. And so, but also as part of honoring Kit Carson, we don't wander around, we just use those bathrooms and we come back to here. Our speaker tonight is really good at reading people. And so also when we need to take a break, we'll take a break. But also everyone in the room is adults. And so also do self-care. You need to go pee, go pee. Francis, you recorded that. You know, that's okay. We ask for that. If you're allowed to turn off your cell phones, please do. If you're not allowed to, due to X, Y, and Z, please put them on buzzer. And if you do need to do anything, please step out of the room just so that we can hold the safety of the room. Also ask that any questions or if anyone's disclosing, as an example, that we keep the confidentiality of those stories within this room and the anonymity of this room so that people can feel safe if they have a question that might be more personal than maybe in a regular lecture series. So we ask for that confidentiality and anonymity. And so can I have that? I agree to it. So thank you for that as well. We do have a piece I want to make sure we continue to talk about. One of the things Golden Willow and Rio Grande has done, thanks to Melissa a lot, and as well as Lori and a few others, what we've done with the intensive outpatients for our community is started a central intake. And so, but there's one number that everything's going into, and then these wonderful people, right now they're all wonderful women, will help walk anyone through that might need an intensive outpatient program and decide where the best fit is for them. So we're pretty excited about that. And we have some information over on the table on that, but you can also either call Golden Willow Counseling or Rio Grande. But thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. And look forward to tonight. We get to have a very special speaker tonight, one of my heroes. You can see it is recorded now. Rachel and I luckily have been able to work together within our community for a long time and have also been able to lean on each other because things get heavy and maybe I can get some ideas from her, she can get them from me, and sometimes it's just like, oh, and it's like, no, we're okay. And so it's kind of what our talk's on tonight in a strange way. So Rachel is the clinical director over at Communities Against Violence. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she does so much for her town. She sits in a lot of meetings, and that doesn't mean she likes meetings, but we also need to know that her wisdom is out there. Tonight we're going to talk about staying connected and how the importance of connection. And with that, I want to introduce Rachel, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
If I stand around here, can everybody hear me on the mic okay? If that changes, just somebody. Thanks, thank you. I really want to just make sure that what Ted said in terms of self-regulation is really encouraged this evening. So that also includes the food in the back, standing if sitting becomes uncomfortable, things like that. We will take a break, probably about halfway through, which is kind of nice just to know that that's coming. How long is this lady going to go on for? Sometimes can be going through all of our minds. So again, self-regulate, and we will take a break sort of halfway through some of the information. So like Ted said, I've worked in this community for about 17 years, previous to that a few years. So I've worked with people for about 20 years now. And some of those people that were experiencing chronic homelessness, they were really impacted by pretty severe mental health. Most all of them knew trauma in some way, whether or not that was really intense domestic violence or sexual violence, things like that, or all the other kinds of pieces. I mean, I think if people have heard TED talk before on grief and loss, that doesn't always apply to the things that we think it will. Trauma can be. One time I heard a definition of trauma as something that you say no to and it happens anyways, which that could be, on a day-to-day basis, a whole lot of different things. And so I think, again, thank you to everyone who's come here tonight to spend this time together. And I just, we all bring our own experiences. And so in talking about connection and talking about relationship, which is what I'll be sharing with you this evening, some of that might land and just be like, yes, exactly that. That makes so much sense. And I might say something else that just doesn't quite fit with your belief system, your life experience, things like that. And that's okay. This is a perspective to take in. I think we can always sort of take some nugget of something, and I'm not sitting up here as though I'm going to tell you everything about yourself, about the world, those kinds of things. So we're going to share this time. And in that also, if something comes up for you as an idea, as a feeling, again, like Ted was saying, an experience that you've had that you feel is worth sharing, please feel free to participate as we go along. It'll make it more interesting for me. And so if people have things to contribute, please feel like you can. When I was pulling together my thoughts for what we would be sharing tonight, and other people's thoughts and work that's in this time, I was sort of overwhelmed by the idea of like, why is helping people something we have to learn? Why is this something that people get master's degrees in, PhDs, doctor of helping, however, right? Our species has been around for a long time. So the number of self-help books, parenting books, somehow something that we know very naturally how to do has gotten lost along the way. I think, it really is, I just kind of want to repeat that, the idea that we have to learn how to help each other and that we have to learn how to ask for help. So these ideas of sort of what's rooted in that observation are going to be sort of woven back and forth throughout the time tonight. Exploring relationship and exploring and understanding the impact of trauma for us. Kind of weaving together these experiences of who we are naturally, how do we come by it in our genes, in our biology? How do we come by it in terms of the experiences then we have in life? How we're built for relationship, and then how we're taught how to be in relationship. And how that is impacted by our experience of trauma. And then also how it impacts our ability to give help, seek help, and receive help. This is going to be sort of the weaving together of ideas that we're going to be bouncing around together tonight. To kind of start off then in that, to think about what is the nature of our work? What's the nature of what's going on when we're seeking help and when we're providing help? It's a question to the room if anybody feels like they have an answer to that in that moment. What's the nature of the work that we're doing when those of us in this room that might be helping providers, people who are seeking help, what's going on there? Does anything come to mind for anybody? Survival? Mm-hmm. Survival? Connection?
Compassion.
Compassion? There's someone else that... Support. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's motivating us, what I've experienced myself, and then what I've heard from other people, why we need that support, why we need that compassion, why we need that connection, sometimes is a deep sense of isolation. A sense of hopelessness sometimes, a sense of helplessness. And we end up seeking this professional help because sometimes the relationships in our personal life are not ones we can rely on. So again, this is this sort of weaving together of, ideally we might be able to rely on family, that's become not available to us for whatever reason, and so we're seeking help, connection, in these moments when we're coming together. So this is a Google image search of what the internet thinks our work is. And I don't know if everybody can kind of see that. I don't know if anything stands out to people from those photos. When I think about compassion, when I think about support, when I think about survival, the reasons like what brings us together, it doesn't come screaming out to me from this image, right? What really stands out to me in this image is the clipboard. Right? Like that clipboard that's there. And I don't know about you, but when I've sought my own help, I'm not just like, please let them write down some things about me on a clipboard. Like, please, I hope they're in there. Ted's got a clipboard in the back in case anybody really needs a clipboard. We're not going in there going, please just give me a really thorough assessment. That's, I just need a really good, long, 3-hour assessment. That's not what we're wanting when we're seeking help, right? And to use the word survival, right? When we're looking to survive because we feel so deeply isolated, we're not needing anybody with a clipboard. Google thinks we do. And I think why I include this is that, the answers that are there about why we're seeking this help, when we're in the position of needing someone to rely on, when we're turning to somebody, I think we hope that they will have expertise, right? We really hope that someone has an answer to this profound overwhelm, to the intensity of what I've experienced, and that it's going to be readily accessible, on their clipboard. And then I think for those of us who are also providers, when you're sitting in the room with someone who's looking for survival, who's looking for support, it also is very comforting to us to think, I have something on this clipboard that I can offer this person, right? Because just sitting with the intensity of some of our experiences can be very overwhelming for the provider. So that's the other piece of the conversation we're going to be weaving in and out tonight, is this dynamic process of people seeking help and people providing help, and that there's impacts of relationship and trauma on both sides of those things. The people seeking help can sometimes be the focus of like, what's going on with you? What are the issues that you're bringing here? What's your trauma? But the people who are providing that support are also human beings equally responsible for addressing the impact of their own relationship, sense of connection, and trauma as well. So this is going to be a real mishmash of all of us together exploring this experience of humanity that we all have access to. This is just another list, right? So when we look at this, these are probably hard to read from that. This is your vision test, Ted. So this is a long list of psychotherapies that have, so on here, there's behavioral therapy, hypnotherapy, holistic therapy, music therapy, individual psychotherapy, some ones that I've never heard of, some that I recognize, and this is not an exhaustive list. These are all the ways, this is like that big self-help book aisle at the Barnes & Noble, if those still exist, of ways we think people need to be helped, of ways we can learn how to help people. All of them, I think really well-intended, ways to try to enhance that feeling of like someone should be able to do something about this. Somebody should have expertise, a modality that can solve the intensity of what's going on for this person, right? What's true, that long, long list that keeps getting longer. We hear about new ideas all the time about how we can help people. Every single one of them, there's not one of them on there that does not fundamentally involve structured, consistent relationship with people, right? That's what they're all talking about. We keep adding and adding and adding, 16-week brief, something intervention, crisis this, right? But fundamentally, what's underneath every single intervention that we come up with when we're trying to figure out how to help people is relationship. Make sense? We have relationship as a piece of every single one of these factors, of these modalities. The reason why we keep coming back to it is that there's also just inherent natural ways of healing in relationship. Kent Hoffman, who is a psychotherapist, he created a parenting class called Circle of Security. If some people might have heard of it, there's some classes like that offered in the community. But I think he summarizes it in some ways. I've come to the following understanding of our shared human predicament, that every heart will inevitably be wounded by an absence that it cannot comprehend, and that no heart can forget the presence it was born to know. So we are built to experience deep pain. We are also built to experience deep connection and deep meaning with each other. We're built for this. We come into the world ready to be deeply meaningful to people and for people to be deeply meaningful to us. So one of the examples of the absence that we cannot comprehend that's so painful is when that doesn't happen. When we come into the world and we don't get enough of that feeling. But the offering that I have tonight is that we absolutely cannot forget that we're built to know that presence of connection. And that's where the healing happens. It's sort of that double-sided coin. That human existence is this deep, deep pain, and that healing and solace is deep connection and meaning with each other. But I think for those of us, any of us, all of these near 8 billion miracles on the planet, when we've known profound pain in relationship, why would we ever believe and put ourselves out there to experience deep connection, right? That's such a risk. I'm going to play a video now that I think helps us, for those of us who did not quite get enough of this feeling, right? Or who haven't had it recently. I feel like this video helps us kind of start to understand a bit of what we're talking about, a bit about this space of deeply connected space that can be healing for us. It's a cartoon made of Brene Brown's work. I don't know if anybody in the room has heard of Brene Brown. I see some heads nodding. She's a social worker, and she's done a lot of research around how we suffer and why we suffer, and then also the courage it takes to step out of that.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that because, all of us have offered sandwiches and been offered sandwiches, right? Like this, we have all avoided connecting with the intensity of someone else's pain to protect ourselves because it's too much. And for those of us who have had incredibly painful experiences, we also can do this to ourselves, right? We have talk around it's time to get over that, you know what I mean? Or it's not that big of a deal, you've been through worse, or there's other people who have been through worse than this. There's all these ways that we step away from the intensity of our own pain. And from working with people multiple hours a day for the past 20 years, the avoidance of the pain is way deeper of a suffering than the pain itself. The isolation that causes is the pain that brings us to each other in these helping environments, that might bring us to a time of treatment or a time of needing to step away from our lives to really focus on ourselves. We have these stories about if I turn towards that pain, the sun will fall out of the sky, right? Or that if I step into my own pain and ask someone to be there with me, then that relationship will disappear, right? So the risk is so great, or we let ourselves believe that the risk is so great, and we isolate ourselves. And that self-talk of, if I acknowledge this pain, then essentially that the world will end. Because it is rooted in survival, We kept those secrets, we felt that pain as a way to survive as children. And it was the load that we have carried. By the time we get to middle life, carrying that load in isolation, if we take a really clear inventory of our lives, is no longer serving any of us. And so the courage to be with that pain, to not offer ourselves sandwiches all the time, and then also to really find help that someone is willing to say to us, I don't even know what to say, I'm so glad you told me. And they're just there with you in it. And that when, from the other perspective, again, as we're entering into this dynamic of the person who's being helped and someone that's offering the help, for people to understand that when that therapist behind door number 2 that we sometimes might get at the mental health agency or whoever it is in our lives, when we say, "This happened to me," and they say, "Oh, well, there's a good support group for that," right? That person is experiencing their own intensity of that pain as well, right? So if we have that feeling of like, man, this person does not get it, what can be true is sometimes they get it so deeply that they can't be present with you in that moment. But finding someone who can is absolutely possible, right? So trusting that instinct of reaching out for help in the first place and not letting maybe potentially one of us who is experiencing our own pain be a distraction for you. You know what I mean? To stay true in the idea that connection, that feeling that we are born to know, that deep presence is absolutely possible. So I think about that. This is an image for me where whoever the self is and whoever the other is in this for you, if you're the provider, if you're somebody getting supports, the environment that you're looking for is this balanced state of self and other, where we meet in the middle, where neither one is particularly overwhelmed by their own needs. There's trust, there's safety, and there's connection. So again, this is really what we're built for. So there's one way to understand the world, another way to understand the world, another thing on the list of blue, all the modalities, is attachment theory. And so attachment theory is sort of the study and philosophy and research of how parents and children interact and bond, and how that impacts us also as adults. And so Donald Winnicott first coined this term, the holding environment. And this is an environment where that infant, which is every infant's needs, gets consistent, predictable, and safe and secure needs being met. And through that predictability, they come to exist in their own mind, they come to understand they're meaningful to their caregiver, and there's this deep resonance. And this is what's activated is, I am meaningful and you are meaningful to me. And I am meaningful and you are meaningful to me. And we come to then, once we know that in that first primary caregiving relationship, we then start to understand in the world, I can take up space in this place. There's a place for me here. When I am struggling, I can ask for help. And we can trust that that will be there, right? And even when we experience what might feel like a failure in that we can start over again. Because we had that initial primary experience of caregiving. So I feel like for me, so I'm assuming, hopefully this is shared by other people in the room, when someone that I am learning from or in a conversation with starts talking about, what really benefits children and how people are successful in life, I automatically start doing the inventory of like, okay, I didn't get enough of this, so-and-so is this way, and these conversations around what ideally a human being would get put me pretty quickly and directly in touch with potentially what I might have gotten too much of, not enough of, some of, those kinds of pieces. And so I think what's important when we talk throughout the evening around how we're impacted by our childhood is that because we are biologically built for connection, our human experiences might have gotten in the way of that, but that biological foundation for connection is still there and can be accessed. So a negative experiences as a child is not a kiss of death, right? This is something that many of us have experienced, and there are ways and there are people who can help us connect and thrive in life. But what happens then is, we're talking about this balance of when, we experience trauma in relationship and we're offering relationship as the healing, right? So Bruce Perry, he's a child psychologist. He started the Child Trauma Academy. He gave us a lot of really great research about the impact of early childhood negative experiences on the mind, body, and spirit. And so when we have this, dynamic, interconnected relationship of helper and helped, sometimes we need to recognize that we are offering essentially the poison as the cure. The idea that people who have been deeply wounded in relationship are expected in counseling to kind of just trust that that person is going to be there to be able to help them. And what we're asking of someone who's had deep, deep wounds in relationship to be able to heal in relationship is going to be, that's going to be a process. And it's what we're trying to make transparent this evening. This is some deeper kind of work around how our experiences early in life can impact who we are, and again, how we seek help. And so there's a concept in attachment theory called ghosts in the nursery. And it's the idea that our negative experiences early on in life can sometimes show up to essentially haunt us later in life. That those echoes of those early childhood experiences, messages about how worthy we are, how unworthy we are, how good we are, how not good we are, show up again later, either in our own relationships with our partners, our boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, with our children as parents, that these experiences are a foundation for relationship. So early on in the 70s, there was a focus on the idea of how essentially these hauntings happen. And for anybody in the room, like when the past is present, like I know I get like a physical experience, right? When this is happening, I am losing my sense of space and time, and there's a difference between like being able to tell the difference between this relationship and sort of, yeah, like how, like feeling unworthy rooted in the past, feeling unworthy rooted in this moment. So these show up for us in relationship because they were our first messages about relationship. Those messages we received from our primary caregiver, if that was a parent, a grandmother, a grandfather, whoever was responsible for those messages for us. And there was a focus early on in attachment theory about the negative pieces of that. We'll get to the flip side, but just to think about, I think for all of us, those moments when that holding environment, that deep resonance, the idea that we are worthy and could take up space, when that's not there, we all as human beings experience a very intense sense of severed belonging, a deep isolation. You know, I picture it sort of like floating way out into deep space. You know, just a sense of total isolation. And when we, I think we again, we come to understand trauma as like, if it's like a hurricane, a really intense violent incident, those kinds of things. But there's nothing more survival-based than the feeling that you do not exist in this world, right? There's not a bigger threat than that kind of sort of self-annihilation. We can potentially survive bruises. We can talk through other kinds of rebuilding homes and those kinds of things, but that experience of that we do not exist is a very intense initial trauma that some of us experienced. And so this idea of severed belonging, that we did not exist essentially as a child because we didn't get those regular needs met, or it was also done erratically, inconsistently, gave us these initial very intense experiences. Thank goodness, thank you Alicia Lieberman, who's another attachment theorist, also came up with the idea of angels in the nursery, right? And that might even be more important than focusing on these ghosts that we might be haunted by, is that in all of that terrible that we might have experienced early on, when someone didn't know better, or knew better and didn't try hard enough, right? That there was also a person, for some people it was a place, some people it was nature, it could be a pet in your home. There was some element that brought you relief from that sense of just floating out into space. There was some element that brought you relief from the sense of total isolation. And I think, especially after severed belonging and the ghosts in the nursery, if people can just take a few seconds and just kind of think about who that was or where that was in your life, that let you know that you were meaningful, that you had the right to take up space, and just kind of think about that person and what elements were there. Because I think when we think about that person, we're directly in touch with what we need now. That person that was there for us, that shifted us from surviving into the idea of, I exist, I could be something. That's what we're looking for. And as therapists, it's what we need to be supporting people to create. And as people seeking help, I really encourage you to be seeking that in the person that you're receiving help from. The right to exist, the right to take up space, the right to hold your own wisdom about yourself, to be meaningful in this world. Because I can't think of an experience, I want to leave space that maybe it exists. Most of us are not seeking therapy because we came into this world so deeply flawed. Life has happened to us, and there's an impact of life on us. And we need help addressing how life has happened to us. The trick of it is that the way life happened to us, fooled us into thinking that something was so deeply wrong with us that we did not have a space here. But that was someone else's fault, right? That was whoever that voice is, that we're not worthy enough, that we shouldn't take up space. That's not something inborn in us, but we can really come to believe that. And so our work together is staying in the intensity of that pain, being able to address it in ourselves, and then heal together, really in relationship in those ways. So a big, for all the angels that just entered the room when people were thinking about that person, place, or thing, I think just like thank you to all those people, right, who showed up for us in a world where people don't always. And hold on to that feeling, you know what I mean? Like really, tonight, get home. If you get home, put their name on a Post-it note, hold on to them somewhere because they were there for us. The ghosts can take up so much space, so overwhelming, but there were angels there, and they're here all the time with us. In those moments where we think, maybe I deserve a little better than this. Maybe I'm going to try this. They're there for us in those moments where we feel disconnected with the helper because they're not a good fit for us, but we think, you know what, I'm going to try and find somebody else. Because I know that I can be deeply connected. It's in us. So a big, big thank you to all the angels, right? And it's nice to feel them in the room. So, I'm realizing this is an intense image to jump to after that conversation. Should have given a little transition there, sorry. When I think about those of us, again, this balance of that relationship can be a really profound, positive experience for us, but that it can also be so deeply wounding. I think about, entering into the world, and it's a big, huge jungle. And you live every day of your life just navigating, maybe swinging from vine to vine. It's just, life is really good in the jungle. And then one day, you're swinging from vine to vine, and you realize very quickly that vine that you've grabbed onto is not a vine. It's a very, very dangerous poisonous snake, and you're bitten, right? And you have a near-death experience. It's a terrible recovery. When you step back into that jungle and you see all those vines that you used to swing from so freely, the brain does not take the time to go, is that a vine or a snake? Is that a vine or a snake? Is that a vine or a snake? It just goes, oops, snakes, right? Why would I waste my time? I almost died, right? Through that last experience. So I think for those of us who have had, and then imagine the experience of being in that same jungle, it being a year later, and you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to put myself out there today. I haven't swung from the vines in a really long time. Life's good. I feel like I've been really doing a good job kind of telling the difference. I'm going to try it again. And we go and we grab that vine and we have another experience, right? So how likely are we going to be then to trust that we could tell the difference between vines and snakes? If we have a third experience or a fourth experience. And so I think for those of us who have had repeated wounding, repeated trauma, repeated, disconnection, isolation, however we would think about it in relationship, we're really walking through the world just going snakes, right? Why would we waste our time? And so then it's really on us, for those of us who are also therapists, helpers in any way, providers, to start to anticipate that is how somebody might be seeing us. Because if I'm just like, hey man, you can trust me, no problem, let's go. Tell me about the worst thing that ever happened to you. Right? Like, why would somebody do that if they've had experiences where trust absolutely bit them? You know what I mean? Right? Like, why would somebody do that? So I need to anticipate that the person that I'm working with is going to absolutely be seeing me as a risk. Why would I trust this person? And that the closer we get, the bigger risk I might actually be for that person, because it's greater harm. It'd be greater pain. The idea that someone takes a risk a fifth or a sixth time. So then we think about people who've been in services maybe also even since they were a teenager or prior to that, and how many times they've had ruptures or someone didn't understand them, or, So then I think about people who might not necessarily be choosing services, but they're in a position where the courts or family or whatever it is are really forcing them into that position, and what help feels like for somebody in that situation. And to me, it would make absolutely no sense for that person to be trusting. And so for me then, if we're engaging in any of those on that long list of, the long list of modalities that might use, and we're not just staying in relationship, not just trying to stay connected, we are really just, missing the mark. And that's on us. And what can happen is then we go, you know what, this person's not very engaged, right? This person's combative, oppositional, defiant, when we actually have been the person to really piss them off. And that's on us. That's on us, right? We've set the stage. Like on sand, it makes no sense for someone, who's had a lifetime of trauma to be able to benefit in 15 minutes from a relationship with someone they just met. And then when we say, I just don't think they're going to be a good fit for the program. We're not seeing who they are in their entirety, and we're not really paying attention to their life experience. When we say, hey, I'm Rachel, I know we just got to know each other. How much do you not want to be here right now? That's more likely to make sense, right? It's not, tell me about the worst day of your life. So I think, again, this is sort of an intense image, but I think that it's important for us also then to also, though, as the person seeking help, to be accountable for what is my work. If I am only seeing snakes, if I'm only seeing every relationship as a risk, how can I start to listen to that angel that told me I could stay connected? How could I take up space? How could I trust? Bruce Perry again, he's got some good quotes, that we must regulate people before we can possibly persuade them with an argument or compel them with an emotional experience, right? So that piece of, if someone's coming in anticipating that they're going to be highly activated, they're not going to be trusting, any of us wouldn't be. So then how do we regulate is through that empathic space, that balanced sense of self and other. And when we're paying attention and the person that we're working with is getting sort of essentially dysregulated, a sense of out of control or overwhelmed with their feelings, we need to stop, right? Because we're not going to get anywhere if we're not staying in that balanced state of trust, of that holding environment where they know that we're going to be meeting their needs in a consistent way, because we understand them. We numb out in lots of ways, right? Because again, we're trying to avoid that intense pain. And when there's also cultural norms that support it, and everyone around us, one of the things that Bruce Perry also talks about is the idea that some of us heal as dogs and some of us heal as cats. And so what you're reminding me of, like when we really know relationship and there's a context for that, we can get together with the pack, right? And we can kind of like stay connected in those ways. But what happens, like say a cat is sitting up in the windowsill, right? And you go over, you pick up the cat, come over on the couch, sit it on your lap, and you're like, let's snuggle. The cat's just like, out of there, right? And so I think because there's just, but if you sit there and are kind of just like waiting long enough, that cat, what will it do, right? Jump down off the windowsill, maybe curl up on your lap. And so I think it takes a little bit of both of what you're talking about. Somebody willing, I think another way you're talking about it, Lawrence, is like your drive for connection won out, right? Against cultural norms, against the intensity of your pain that you might have wanted to ignore, not to speak for you, right? But that internal drive towards this can be better. Whatever angel was showing up, the idea that those forces, were at war in there, right? The drive to numb out and not feel it versus the risk of like, there's reward on the other side of this. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you very much. This is one of my favorite quotes that kind of encapsulates this for me. So, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down. If there's someone in the room that's really helped, please share, right? We don't, but what are we doing when we say calm down, right? It's distancing. We're trying to enjoy that illusion of control or that somebody could do something about this, and we're avoiding our own pain in the moment. But I think normally also what happens is you might say calm down, and when they don't calm down, you don't go, oh wait, I have to help regulate them through my relational powers. You might just say calm down louder, right? So the second part of that slide would be they've not calmed down by being told to calm down again and again and again. So paying attention to what works around us. So I would encourage, again, the idea that there are books about this, master's degrees, places you can go. All we have to do is look at what has worked for us, what is not working around us right now, and the answers are really there. This is not, helping people is not complicated, but it's not easy. right? So the complexity is really not there, because all we're really needing to do is sit with someone in the intensity of their pain. So it's a simple thing. It's one thing, but it's not simple to do because of what comes up for us when we're really kind of going through that. Let's take a break. Yeah? If that works for everybody? Let's just have a little time, stretch our legs.
So all of these are here, and you can also share them with family members, which we forget about, as well as community members. We live within, we're connecting in these different ways, but then also there all of a sudden can be the thing called language. And maybe you're talking the same language for the first time of just the different pieces within emotional world. As Rachel's talked, each of us in our own way are providers. It doesn't mean we have to have all the credentials and that sort of thing, but each of us have our own way that we are helping out others. It might be changing a flat. That person might be totally dysregulated. And it's how do you connect with that person? And so as she's talking, which I believe she does a great job with, please remember, part of community is we are all providers. There isn't the identified person receiving and the identified person giving. We all have those different roles at different times. So I think that's a great piece to remember. Is I've been back there listening of the different ways that I've played those different roles within communities. So we are all providers, as well as hopefully we can have those safe places where we can reach out and have that healthy hand. So I'm going to turn it back to Rachel, and appreciate it.
Again, in working across different fields, my experience has been that there are people who are born with different brain structure and brain wiring, where, the different medical interventions, medicines, different treatments are going to be helpful. But my experience with working people who have lived on the street, been chronically homeless, who come to our domestic violence, sexual violence shelter, people who are working with substance abuse, or experiencing substance abuse, the truth of what is bringing them there is their life experience, right? And everyone has their own story about what has brought them there. And there's not a manual for that. I think that is sort of the push and the pull of what we might be talking about here tonight, is that someone's life experience when they come in that door is so overwhelming that we want to be able to reach for the manual, right? We want to be able to say there's an answer here. And I think what I'm offering is that instead of turning for the answer, to step into that I have the answer, which is my ability to deeply connect with this person who's been deeply isolated by their life experience. And to trust that that is enough. And I think we have decades, if not over a century now, of a psychological field who has really ignored the idea that just our being together is enough. And it's made it as though we need to turn it into a science. It's made it as though we need to find some special cure. And what's true is that all of those things that we keep finding, none of them work the same way that being deeply connected, not being alone, works. So there's people with profound neurobiological mental health disorders, right? Schizophrenia, things like that, right? And so when we think about sort of how we come in with the nature and we think about what comes in with the nurture, I think we need to leave space for, and there's a strong body of research behind this, that excluding certain mental health disorders, most of what shows up in our centers and services is the impact of trauma. And when we don't seek to understand that in a more profound way, we're really missing the opportunity to connect with what people need. And for being someone who helps people, especially I'm thinking about someone who's been impacted by poverty and sexual abuse, and they have a marginalized identity, and, right? I almost sometimes when you're sitting in that room just thinking like, it's almost like when you're in that dream and you try to turn your head fast enough to see, the answer or something like that. That is though, there's this feeling of like, there should be something more. There should be something we can do. But when you talk with people who have experienced healing, over and over and over again, It was a connection that they had with somebody. Rarely, if ever, is it the medication that they finally found. For some people it is, so I don't want to discount that. But for most of us who are coming to Rio Grande, CAV, Golden Willow, the remedy is the connection. Just from speaking from a provider experience, that's the healing. But I think you're getting at exactly what we're trying to talk about here tonight, right? Sort of like why after tens of thousands of years as a species, why does it seem complicated? And I think, again, what I'm offering is that the truth is so simple, but it's also so challenging to do. And so it's supporting people to understand that. And it's what we're all kind of like the suit got bigger, we're bigger, but we need the same things, right? So in trying to recognize this, in trying to have a field that is, again, trying to come up with some way of supporting people that are struggling. People might have heard the idea of trauma-informed care. If you're a provider, someone at that service, again, kind of like what Ted reiterated, just we're all in those boxes at some point, right? This is a term that's been around for a while, and it's about recognizing that when people are coming to us, it's that we need to be asking questions around what have you experienced, what has happened to you, and not necessarily, sort of what's wrong with you. So it's a shift in that treatment, intervention kind of way of being. It's a philosophy. It's not necessarily a practice. One of the things that happened for our agencies, and everybody in the room should know this, is that what happened then is that people providing the service for a while have been sort of operating as though like, okay, well, we're informed about your trauma, right? We know you've been through a bad thing. But a big piece of trauma-informed care is that organizations like CAV, Golden Willow, Rio Grande, there's an organizational approach where the provider is also supposed to be looking at the impact of trauma on themselves. And when we don't do that, none of us as human beings are our best selves. And so a big part of these trauma-informed organizations, they've been really sort of more hyper-focused on the trauma experience of the person we're serving. We've really left behind the organizational change that was also supposed to go along with that. And so a big part of, just trying to get this to, there we go. A big piece of trauma-informed care, coming online with the full model is self-awareness and reflective capacity for the person providing the service. And that also really is a practice throughout the organization. A big piece of trauma-informed care might also sound like that the experts at our agency are the people that we work with. That no one, working here has more wisdom about that person's life than the person who lived it. But we're responsible for asking ourselves, how am I impacted by the people I'm working with? And what's my awareness of how I'm impacting them, right? Because without that awareness, we're kind of in that model of like, this broken person needs to be fixed. We need to get the clipboard, and we're gonna fix this broken person. We need to be looking at this as humans being with humans, and how are we impacting each other, and tracking that as much as possible, moment to moment, right? So that I'm understanding, am I contributing to this person's holding environment, their sense of safety, their sense of trust, or am I, by my actions, breaking trust in this moment? And cultivating that sense of self-awareness also ensures that our relationships are safe, respectful, and transparent. So the idea of reflective capacity, this idea of essentially thinking about ourselves, is also the ability to imagine the mental states of others, right? So that it's an accurate, as much as possible, accurate experience of ourself and that other person. And when we do that, we can get a clearer picture of why are we acting the way we're acting, and why is the person that I'm working with behaving the way that they're behaving. It's our uniquely human capacity to make sense out of each other. When we're in trauma, when we're seeing all the snakes and not the vines, we're not in that place of being accurately able to look at the world, to look at ourselves. So wanting to do that is different than being able to do that. So this slide kind of, kind of maps out the idea of what's needed to get into that reflective state. for us to step down out of the trauma, step down out of the reactivity, and into a place where we're able to actually start some of that healing that Lawrence talked about, that Ted referenced also as well. So we need to understand the impact of trauma on ourselves. We need a nice framework for understanding the trauma in our lives. We need to be able to step back and watch the interactions that are happening. And the really key piece is that we also need to be able to talk about it with someone else. Because if I think I know about my trauma or someone else's, and I think I'm stepping back and looking at it, I could be operating on another planet thinking, I'm being so helpful, right? But when I say that out loud to someone else and they go, whoa, 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 Rachel, what was happening? I'm like, no, I was being helpful, right? So we really need to carefully go through this process, and we need to have someone inside of our organizations, inside of, whatever our community of support is, to be able to be that person that we can talk that through with. I think that's the thing, is that when these experiences have regularly caused us to numb out, to turn away, this is the risk, to stay in the discomfort, to stay in that knowledge, and to not escape. Escape feels like the safest thing to do. Feeling what you're going through is the most courageous thing that you can do, right? So again, we want to get a little bit at what takes, so if this is so natural for us, right? If this is what we're built for, if this is what she's been saying tonight, right? Why are we not just sort of here all the time? Why are we not able to trust? Why are we not able to stay in that connected place? So I'm going to talk about a few pieces that might get in the way. This is it, and you might have others that sort of get in your way of sort of what we've talked about, of being able to trust, to stay connected, right? The neurobiology of trauma. Trauma is one of the things that we've been talking about tonight in all of its forms that gets in the way of us being able to stay connected. Now, this slide is a picture of the neurobiology of trauma, which I'm not an expert in, but what we can think about is that there's two different, essentially, parts of our brain, right? One where we are relational, reflective, and have access to our sense of safety and trust, and one where we absolutely don't. So our limbic brain, which for many of us, we might have heard that, fight or flight, those are words that go along with that kind of part of our brain, is where we are when we're in the trauma. When we're being relational and reflective, thinking about the future, all of these other things, not in survival mode, we're up here in the prefrontal cortex. So without creating a strong, reflective, relational process, we don't have any ladder between these two parts of the brain, right? So we just kind of can stay stuck in that trauma. And we all, I think, know what that feeling feels like when we are just spiraling in that stuck place. I see some heads nodding, so thank you, because I'm not alone in that, right? We know that physical feeling. So we don't have to be a neurobiologist to understand that our brain gets hijacked by different experiences, right? And that while that's not our fault, right? What happened to cause that trauma, that we're not to blame for that we can absolutely be accountable for the impact of that trauma on our lives now. I think Lawrence gave a really fantastic example of that with the story that he shared about himself. So this happens, our brains can be hijacked by that trauma, and there are ways to build that ladder, right? There's ways to invest in that construction. I don't know if people can read this from the back, but these are some really common, also like forgetting the neurobiology piece, people who have accessed help related to anything they've experienced, we know that there's that sense that comes with it of anxiety, of isolation. There might either be sort of like intrusive thoughts that we have, or perseverating on the trauma that happened, or also an avoidance, right, of the thing that happened, or anything that might remind us of that. So again, we don't need to know necessarily the brain and the neurobiology and the names to know how that shows up for all of us. And we know it's trauma because across the board, people who have been through these experiences, while many of the details are personal for us and our own story, we all generally react in a series of like a few ways, right? It's either going to be avoidance, which is I'm not going anywhere near that. It might be, numbing out the pain, those kinds of things. It might also make us more generally fearful or angry when we're stuck in those places of the trauma. And again, there's no blame in that, but we can also look at the impact of it, because none of the things that's on that list is serving us, right? So these are indicators of imbalance. These are indicators that we're stuck in that trauma. and that we need to do something to alleviate that for ourselves. Because it is a place of suffering, right, when we're stuck in those symptoms. Because we're also stuck in the past. We're not getting to experience life in its fullest moment now, right? One of the things I think that from my experience with talking about people, I'm a big gossip, talking with people, is this feeling of that they should have known better, right, when a bad thing has happened. And that's across the board, something for us as human beings called hindsight bias. So once the bad thing has happened, then we can see everything leading up to that moment that we should have been able to tell was going to be the reason why that bad thing happened, right? So one of the ways I picture this is like when you're watching a horror movie and the teenage girl's at the top of the basement stairs, kind of like, hello? And you're just like, no, right? We watching can go, she shouldn't do this, she shouldn't do this, she shouldn't do that, because the bad thing's going to happen, right? And we do that to ourselves when the bad thing has happened. And it's a protective capacity. Our brains want to avoid bad things from happening. So when it has, we want to make sense out of why it did so we can avoid it in the future. And when it happens, even when it would have been impossible to predict, to really understand, we would rather blame ourselves than have it just be totally no one's fault, than have it just be a completely random bad act. That is much more painful that something bad could happen at any point than thinking that it's completely my fault. And it being completely my fault might be a narrative actually that's very easy for us to just grab if we've heard that throughout our lives in terms of other bad things happening. And so this keeps us, this capacity to look at fault, to look at blame, right? To do that, it serves us to avoid potentially future things from happening. But when something truly is not our fault, like abuse, right? Like other kinds of trauma that are out of our control, this psychological process does not serve us, and we have to intentionally outrun it, or else we will be living in our own self-blame. Or we will also, potentially as providers, right? If I'm somebody who works with people who have experienced domestic violence, and she or he stayed when they could have left, didn't call law enforcement when they could have, right? I need to watch in myself that I'm not sitting there going, I hope this never happens to me. Why did it happen to them? Let me make sure I know, and it's because they're bad and should have done it differently, right? So again, for people accessing help and providing help, this is a dynamic that we're both going to be experiencing, and we need to be monitoring because it keeps us out of the experience of just that sometimes really terrible things happen, or also that sometimes actually someone might have had control over the incident and they're the ones that are responsible for it, not ourselves. Right? I'm going to give you a little video break.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I am a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house. I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who is my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? what's going on. So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all, like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the na thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
So, I think the thing about when we're thinking about like hindsight bias, when we're thinking about trauma, when we're thinking about blame, none of these things are going to be things or processes that we escape. They're absolutely a part of who we are as human beings. What we can shift is our awareness when it's happening, and that's the reflective process, right? So if I am getting stuck in the just damn you, Steve, right? If I'm actively trying to make that someone else's fault, then can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Then I can learn to start to catch, why am I needing this to be someone else's fault right now? Oh, right. Because I need some sense of control over this chaos, right? But wait, can anyone actually control what's going on here right now? Did something bad just happen, right? Or if we're blaming ourselves, if something didn't turn out the way that we wanted it to, if we have a setback, all of those different kinds of pieces. We are, what's true when we're hearing that blame in our mind, is that we're having uncomfortable feelings. So blame is another way, if we're thinking about our use, if we're thinking about other kinds of behaviors, blame is another way for us to numb out. It's another way for us to not experience our uncomfortable feelings. So it's another indicator for us that we're experiencing pain. And so, to frame that, right, as opposed to like, like when we're hiking on a trail and there's trail markers about where we need to go next, when we're experiencing blame on that trail, that's pointing us towards our uncomfortable feelings, right? And it's vulnerable, right? I mean, again, not to keep quoting Lawrence, thank you for sharing what you did earlier. When we grow up with the idea that looking at that discomfort, experiencing that pain is indulgent of ourselves, or you know what I mean, or like that our emotional world shouldn't take up space, then this is reframing everything we've ever learned about our own discomfort, right? And that's why Brene Brown talks about it as courageous. Because I think anyone who's gotten anywhere close to looking at the enormity of their own pain knows that is not something that weak people do, right? That is something that, everyone in this room, if we've gone anywhere near that, and if anyone gives us crap around that, we need to also have that internal voice going of like, they don't know how courageous this is, right? They're trying to get us on board with helping them numb out, right? If it's about blame, if it's about these cultural norms around that we don't have any of these feelings, and they don't have any business in our life. Because if you're choosing that courageous path, then your pain is not a sign of weakness. So I didn't get this phrase wrong, right? This is a reframe. But don't just do something, sit there. This is for people who might be on the helping side of any relationship. that the impulse to, if it's to blame, to do, to get out the clipboard, these ways that we create distance through our actions, when really, again, anybody that I've talked to that has experienced any relief from what life has brought to them is from just being with someone else, taking a little bit of it on, and lightening their load. And so for those of us, and it's a challenge. Your family member, that resulting in violence for you, we can understand that in a reflective way, that those feelings in him, right? That's an expression that he could not manage what was going on for him. That was nothing about your experience. That was an expression of his own pain. And so again, the more, it becomes this superhuman power. Like the more all of us in here right now, if we became people who could sit there in our pain and discomfort without doing anything about it, you become exceptional on this planet. Because most people are really, this is so familiar, like what Brene Brown's work is, everything that we're talking about tonight, these patterns are so familiar, and everyone is just bouncing around the planet, engaged in avoiding their pain. So when we start to really sit with it, for one thing, you have a whole lot of extra space in your brain, because we are managing our pain all the time when we're avoiding it. So, and it's this crazy, like a sort of double-edged sword, where by avoiding it, we're thinking we're not experiencing it. We're experiencing it through the avoidance of it all the time. And rarely, there was a person I knew who was dealing with deep, deep, deep depression, and it was causing him to want to not be here anymore, wanting to end his life. And people were visiting with him, persuading him of everything he had to live for, right? Everything that he had in life that was worth living for. And a good friend of his went over and said, what if you need to get deeper into this depression? What wisdom is at the very bottom, beyond what you think you have the capacity to feel? And that's what really got him out of it, was someone saying, you could feel this even more deeply, and I'll be here with you while you do it. And then the sun didn't fall out of the sky, right? Everyone trying to be helpful was, look at all these things, right? But all they were doing was helping him avoid his pain. The person that said, let's go there, that was life-saving for him. In the event that I haven't said anything clearly enough about this tonight, is also, and I guess it does make me a little emotional to think about it, so thank you for sharing so authentically, because I think that's why. That we need to honor those ways that when we look back, we can condemn, but you were really surviving, right? All those ways. So there can be this critical eye around the way we've numbed out. And I think we don't have a choice until we have a choice, And so for us to also be very gentle with the ways that we've survived, to understand that for whatever reason that brought you to that time with that EMDR, with that person who had the willingness to be with you in that pain, and then the courage of your own self, to let all of that out, to let the memories unfold like that. We are all trying to make it through this all the time, all the freaking time. That's all we're doing. And, if it's Netflix, if it's some hard drug, we're also trying to escape it all the time, because it's a wild, wild ride. So I really thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you. And again, the angels and all the ways we've made it through, and then when we make it through, thank God for that moment, Yeah. This goes a little, feel free to come on up and help me give this presentation now, because it's exactly what you were saying. Having someone here with me in this difficult feeling allows me a way out of feeling bad. And please let me know you get what I'm feeling and that you will wait here with me until something changes. For the people providing help in the room, that waiting is when we start to think, a real therapist would be doing something different right now. Somebody else, I better get training because I don't really know what to do right now. So this is my disclosure moment as a professional. The day before I started providing counseling, I'd gone to master's school, graduate school, all the webinars. The day before I start training, providing therapy, that morning over breakfast, I Googled, what does a therapy session look like? right? Because it's this feeling that somehow we are going to really know how to do this, right? That there's something, some way I'll be able to tell when I am a professional helper, right? And the truth is, it's by being freaking born, right? Like that we're all, that we all have the capacity to help each other. And so I think that that feeling erodes over time because we start to recognize there's no sense of expertise that's needed in that room. It's just me, right? It's just me sitting there with that person. I'm going to talk just a little bit about relational patterns. I want to be mindful of time here. And so one of the things in terms of going back to those early childhood experiences, us as human beings, we have a whole rainbow, but we have 6 core feelings that we experience: anger, sadness, joy, shame, curiosity, and fear. How we are able to handle them and experience them as adults has everything to do with how our parents were able to handle our experience of them as children, right? And so our ability to experience sadness now is something we learned by how our parents were able to handle our sadness as a child. And so if when I was feeling sad, you know, as an infant even, my parents held me and went, "Aw," right? That small little noise let me know someone was there. They didn't have to speak verbally to me. I was held in that sound, right? How my anger was responded to, right, has everything to do with how I know what to do with this feeling now. So if we look at that list together for a second, and you just kind of do a quick inventory, right? What did I learn about how to handle my anger from my parents? What did I learn about how to handle my sadness? What I can say is from years as working as a children's therapist is I never had a single phone call from a parent saying, "Rachel, I have no idea what to do. My child's been happy all day long. Please help." Right? No one's calling in crisis about that. Now, in some families, I don't want to discount that because sometimes joy is sort of prideful, right? And so if somebody might have been like, you know, chastised, you know, for taking up too much space with their joy as a child or something like that. But typically, our feelings around anger, sadness, and shame are where our parents tended to struggle. So because they struggled with them, we are. There's no blame there. That's an experience of humanity. And we can explore the impact of that on us, and release them from, you know, like, from their own shame around that. You know, like we're in this moment with it now, and we can explore, how do I learn more about my anger? How do I learn more about my sadness? And that can happen in that trusted relationship. If there's an orphan in our lives, it's our pain. Nobody wants their pain. We want it gone. That's a big part of what meditation or reflection offers. No longer pushing the pain away, just sitting and just being with this exact pain. Every moment is just another opportunity to stay simple and hold the orphan of your pain. So I'm seeing a few collective deep breaths. If that's a little overwhelming, because we spend our whole lives outrunning it. But when we also treat that as you would potentially an orphan or a child, right? Which is tenderly, which is loving, which is knowing that it needs to be seen and valued. Then it also shifts something within ourselves. There's one thing about, like, you know, when we're avoiding our pain, I picture, you know, that experience that we had that caused that pain. I'm desperately trying to put that up on that shelf. You know, I'm desperately just like trying to find a place to store it that it'll never come out of. And when we're trying to avoid it, we didn't get it put up there very well. We experienced it, and we're just avoiding it until it somehow magically finds its way up into storage. Right? So it's falling off the shelf all the time. But when we sit with it intentionally and hold it and think, where does this belong? We can put it away. And when we go and we seek it out intentionally, then it's not re-traumatizing to us. It's something we've been through, we're looking at, right? That daily experience of it just falling over, those are when we might use words like triggered, right? Or you know, like I'm being dysregulated. But getting in a reflective, regulated state, finding someone who can help you do that, and going and looking at it and picking it up, that's healing. Right? So one of the questions that I want to offer tonight is, let's say magic wand, if someone finds one, we'll all share it with each other. But let's say we could all leave here tonight ready to trust, ready to connect, ready to rely on the help that's being offered, and believe that it could be helpful to us, right? What rule from your childhood would you have to break in order for that to be true? So for some of us, let's say that my feelings of sadness disappointed my caregiver, right? So the rule I would have to break in order to trust that my sadness could be addressed is that I might disappoint somebody. I can break that rule and still, like what Andy said earlier, survive. Whereas, let's say in my childhood, it didn't feel like I could survive if I broke that rule. So what rule, from your families, do you have to break in order to trust? I mean, sometimes in families, sometimes in cultures, like what Lawrence was saying, no one can be trusted, right? The idea that systems can't be trusted, the idea that if you talk about your feelings, then you're a fill in the blank, right? Those are rules in our homes that we inherited. So what rules do we need to start breaking to be able to play the game this way in life, that this could be true? And I want to offer one of the most fundamental ones that I see come up for myself and that I see for others. And that is, and it's a borrowed phrase from Kent Hoffman, who we've referenced a few times here, is that we're worthy of this, that we deserve this in our life, that we are worthy of connection, that we're worthy of taking up space.
My name is Kent Hoffman, and I'm a clinician who has, for the past 40 years, worked with people struggling with often severe anxiety and depression. Homeless adults, homeless teenagers, college professors, doctors, lawyers, and parents from all walks of life. In all that time, the most important thing I've come to know can be summarized in 9 simple words. Every person we will ever meet has infinite worth. That's it. That's the entire learning. No arguing, no convincing, just 9 words. Every person we will ever meet has infinite worth. I first heard those words on October 3rd, 1970 from Frank Kemper, my first clinical professor in graduate school. Before hearing his words, I divided people into tidy categories: good versus bad, okay and not okay, acceptable, not acceptable, all of which were highly conditional. In 5 seconds, that all shattered. Every person we will ever meet, no matter who they are, has immeasurable value. No person is worth more than any other person. Truth be told, I would now define evil as the belief that some people are worth more than other people. Underneath our exterior attributes, our so-called beauty or intelligence, our noticeable capacities or lack thereof, we each share the exact same infinite worth, which all adds up to this. No matter who you are, no matter how comfortable or lost, happy or broken, if you're hearing these words, the only thing that matters is that you know that you matter, and you matter absolutely. And so does every other person you'll ever meet.
And I'll leave you with this image and those words, because I think that what our infinite worth also really holds is all of our capacity for connection, all of our capacity to also feel our intense pain. It's part of that whole experience. None of those things impact our infinite worth. They're absolutely a part of them. Every single one of these stories. And so for me, you know, the idea that holding all of that, that the people around us can help hold that. So there's this external holding environment that we're a part of that hold us when we need that holding. And that slowly and slowly and slowly, by holding that pain, we also just have this deep internal capacity to be okay. And so I really appreciate all of you kind of being here with me tonight, hanging in there. Thank you. I know we've been here together for a while. Thank you to Francis for the videotaping. Videotaping, that dates me now. I don't know if they call it that way anymore. But I want to really say thank you for everybody who has come. We acknowledge the angels tonight that helped us along the way. So I think, again, another way I'd really like to just also leave is to really hold on to that image of the people who also taught you all of the good, because they're in there when you're seeking help now. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.